Okay, so welcome everybody, and for those of you that are west of Eastern Time, we'll say good afternoon, and I'm on the East Coast. We're just crossing into the afternoon hour here, and we're going to jump right in. And so the purpose of this webinar is to help people, ideally give you one or two nuggets that you can take away to boost your business, to increase your revenue dollars using the TriMetrix EQ. And so I'd like to start with an interactive poll, and I need to. Here we go. We're going to start with a quick math question, and I believe Candace will put the polling screen up. And the question is, what does $87,600 represent? And we're going to give you between 5 and 10 seconds to choose your A, B, C, or D on the screen, and then we'll see the results. And Candace, do you have the poll results yet?
Yes, the poll results are up, and we're seeing about 12% of the attendees say that $87,600 represents the down payment on their vacation home. 0% say it's the cost of their new Porsche Carrera, which is a shame because that's my selection. The value of selling one TriMetrix EQ a day for a year, 42% said that was the correct answer, and 46% said all of the above, Mark.
Okay, well, we have some smart people on the line, and it is all of the above, and that's almost the exact cost of a Porsche Carrera. It's about $500 more, I think. But the most important thing is that that does represent selling one TriMetrix EQ per day at the standard PTI book price. And it's real money. It really works. And in 2016, we averaged 1.2 TriMetrix EQs a day, which takes us over 6 figures just for this one assessment. And tracking this year, we're averaging 1.5. We checked last Friday, and as of July 21st, we had run 30. We're somewhere in the low 30s just since July 1st, and that's consistent with what we've done in the year. So let's talk about how we do that and give you some ideas that you can do that. And we'll start with a story. And this story is about Bob, and I'm going to leave this paragraph up for a few minutes. I'm actually going to read some of the sentences for those of you that might be listening in the car and not have the screen up. And this is a paragraph from the blending section, which includes input that takes into consideration the behavioral style, which is his disc style, his driving forces, and his EQ. It's on around page 52 of the TriMetrix EQ report, and in my opinion, one of the strongest pages on the report. It says Bob has a low level of self-awareness. He doesn't tend to recognize some mental and physical changes in how he's feeling. Coupled with his high steadiness behavior, he's a high S. These feelings will be managed purely on a behavioral basis. People with high steadiness tend to be methodical and sincere and willing to accommodate the needs of others, and they may suppress their feelings when particular triggers are ignited without even realizing it. They can become overly possessive of information and even stubborn in emotionally charged situations, and they may be unaware of increased intensity being displayed. So, you know, we certainly see some potential road hazards or tripping hazards in the office and in business with Bob, and it might be one thing if Bob was your new controller or your new accounting manager, and we've seen these types of behaviors in those roles. But in this case, Bob is a 62-year-old chairman of a third-generation company that does about $100 million in revenue. And we had done this organization's strategic plan. We had done 12 executive interviews with their top executive team or executive committee to which they were referred. And what we heard consistently were these things about Bob. And when we tried to work with Bob one-to-one, he just wouldn't open his eyes. He just didn't see it. But when we put the TriMetrix EQ report in front of him, he saw this, and it gave us an objective tool to take away the quote-unquote touchy-feely things that he was accusing us of, and it opened his eyes. And we'll revisit this later in the webinar, but we've had transformational change not only with Bob, but in the way he works with the leadership team and the way that this 50-year-old organization is moving forward. So I share that with you to let you know that it's real. The other thing I like to do as we jump in is to properly set the table for what we're talking about here, because we can talk about the value of EQ and all of the things, but I just want to give you some quick background. And from around 2010 to 2014, I was running the workshop circuit and program circuit really with EQ. As soon as PTI Success Insights came out with the EQ assessment, I saw the value and we started running with it. It quickly became one of our most in-demand workshops in addition to the classic disc and what was the motivators and is now driving forces. And then in 2015, we took on Lindsay, and then there was two. And Lindsay and I had a strategic planning session for our own business, and we had to figure out how we were going to scale this business so it could accommodate not just Lindsay and I, but the other 5 people that we eventually will have or now have on our team. And we chose the TriMetrix EQ as one of our strategic focus areas, and we've done very well with it. Okay, so just setting the table, we want to understand that this is about making money. We saw the opportunity with the TriMetrix EQ, and we'll share the 5 different ways that you can boost your revenue. And Lindsay and I both share in common an extremely high resourceful or utilitarian drive. Some may say it's too high, but this is where we were focused, and this is what we wanted to do to achieve the goals, the lofty goals that we set for ourselves. Okay, so let's take a look into the TriMetrix EQ report. This is actually the cover of Bob's report, and you'll see that we have the Bluewater logo on there. When we're using these with groups, we always private label them, and we'll put our client's logo on there. They liked it more, and we'll have a brief Bluewater reference on the report, but we make it more about the client than about us. So as a baseline, I think we'd all agree that the TPI SI TriMetrix EQ assessment is an excellent report. If you haven't spent time with it, run one on yourself. The best way to learn about these things is to read about yourself, and I think you'll see the value. And pay close attention to the integrated sections, both in the disc and driving forces, as well as that final blended section in the back. The second point I want to make is the TriMetrix EQ provides great value and is directly applicable for both professional and personal development. What I mean by that is everything that people learn about themselves in their role at work can also be directly applied outside of work. And I believe that's where we get a lot of value, and we can share a lot of stories of successes that we've had on the personal side as well. So as we set the table, let's think back to the classic singles. And we have our red Solo cup that I think everybody, especially this time of year with holiday and vacations, can probably attest to. There's that drop stop, one of the largest selling items on Shark Tank. It's just a single thing that changed the world from dropping cell phones and change down the seat of your car. Okay, there's the Uber, that was a disruptive single app that's also changed the world. And then lastly, we have the Virgin Atlantic Lounge at Heathrow Airport, which singularly just blew away and reset the bar for travel lounges. Those are our singles. And so what does that have to do with what we're talking about? Well, I'm talking about the classic PTI Talent Insights, the disc-only report. We simply don't use that. And so while it's a classic, it's had its time, but it's much more powerful when we put it with a combo. And here we have some examples of our classic duos, our bacon and eggs, peanut butter and chocolate, some wine and cheese, and maybe some people online having that for lunch right now. And my favorite, Batman and Robin. And that will lead us into the classic duo that we have with TPI Success Insights, and that's the disc and the driving forces, what used to be the disc and the motivators. Still a very powerful report. We use them with betting clients, and it's a great differentiator as opposed to using the classic single alone. And you can probably see where I'm going with this next is we'll take a look at our classic trio, and a few examples here of classic trios, and I'm sure you can see where we're going with this. But now we've got the classic disc report combined with the driving forces and the EQ, and that's what gives us the TriMetrix EQ. Not only do you have 3 reports in one, but it's integrated and has those combo sections, as we call them. So let's start with the first way that we suggest you consider boosting your business with TriMetrix EQ. And the first one is to add the emotional quotient assessment with the disc and driving forces that gives you that blended section. So anyone that's already using disc and driving forces with existing clients, you can go back and say, we have a better assessment we'd like to use, or you can just introduce it with new prospects and clients, and it really is a differentiator. So we were able to go back and tap into our existing client base with a lot of excitement, new workshops, rerunning several reports for existing clients and past clients because we had this new TriMetrix EQ report. And I'd like to spend just a few minutes of how impactful the EQ really is. And this is a statistic that our clients love, because what this speaks to is this is talking about people that have already made it to a certain level of senior leadership in their organization. So they have to have had something to get them there, whether it was experience or technical knowledge, et cetera. But what this tells us is that 90% of the difference between star performers and average performers that have already made it to senior leadership directly correlates with their EQ. So if you're looking to, and I think someone sent a pre-question in, if you're looking to grab the attention of an executive, this is by far one of the strongest attention grabbers. Okay? I'd also like to share with you the best definition that we have found for EQ, and it comes right out of the TTI-SI EQ presentation. And emotional intelligence, or emotional quotient, is the ability to sense, understand, and effectively apply the power and acumen of emotions to facilitate high levels of collaboration and productivity. It's a lot of words, and it sums it up beautifully. The executive summary, I would suggest, is it means that someone with a high level of emotional intelligence understands what's going on around them. They read the cultural current. They don't react, but they respond appropriately. And the visual, for those of you that are watching on the screen, you can see that EQ is really the basis for superior performance in decision making. Okay, without a strong EQ, it's very difficult to make good decisions consistently. You make it lucky once or twice. But we're talking about consistent superior performance. This is another terrific visual because it shows how EQ works. And we have two profiles. The one on the left shows our standard brain function under low emotion. And basically, we get input, sensory input, up our brainstem. We process it in our higher cortex, and we can make a sound decision. Pretty simple. But with the look of the profile on the right, there's a term that we use called the amygdala hijack. And what happens under high emotion, whether it's anger, fear, excitement, love, those types of things, it could be frustration. Under high emotion, that the amygdala, that tiny little reptilian gland, starts pumping out adrenaline, and it actually cuts off our higher cortex, and it puts us in that fight or flight mode, and we just can't make rational decisions. And the idea is that by having a good, solid grasp on our EQ, we never get into the amygdala hijack mode. And as I described this, you're probably thinking of some people in your life, whether they're at work or outside of work, that suffer from the amygdala hijack once in a while. So at least now you have a name for the symptom when you see it. The second way that we suggest boosting your business with the TriMetrix EQ is if you have a client or a prospect that's already using some type of emotional intelligence assessment or emotional report, something outside of the TTI Success Insights, add the DISC and the driving forces onto it as a big differentiator. There's no other assessment or product on the market that puts these three things together, and we have converted legacy other emotional intelligence type assessments into loyal followers and clients because we've introduced them to the power of this three-part report, hence the TriMetrix. And when you do that, again, we always follow the TTI standard book pricing. It adds $100 additional revenue per assessment. If you're using it for coaching or for lengthy workshops or other types of programs, it just adds that much more, and we'll talk about some of the ways that we use it in a few slides. Back to the next slide. So the fourth way that we suggest that you boost your business with the TriMetrix EQ is to incorporate it in every type of work that you do. And I'm putting on the screen just a few of the types of work that we do, and for those that are listening in without the screen, I'll read them to you, but we have leadership programs. We use them for selection, workshops, coaching, that's individual executive coaching, team development. We do cultural assessments for organizations, and I'm going to jump back for just a minute. And those are just some of the things that we do, and in all of these, we incorporate the TriMetrix EQ right from the get-go. For example, when we're doing a cultural assessment for an organization, and we're going to interview one-on-one, maybe 12 or 18 of their executive leadership team, we will always assess people ahead of time, and sometimes not even give them the reports. We'll do them later in a workshop, but it gives us some insights into the natural strengths on the team, of course, their behavioral style, what motivates them, what the driving forces, and the level of EQ with which we're dealing. So our intent is that you start thinking about what type of work that you do and how you would incorporate the TriMetrix EQ into what you're already doing, as opposed to recreating the wheel and starting something new. The spoiler alert refers to, we refer to the EQ portion of the report as the humbler, and we refer to that internally as the humbler because typically most participants that take the EQ don't score very well in all 5 of the dimensions. There are the 5 dimensions of EQ, 3 of them are intrinsic and 2 of them are extrinsic, and usually people don't score very well. And so we never send out the EQ ahead of time. In fact, if we're doing a workshop, and it's a TriMetrix EQ workshop, we will actually unbundle the EQ portion of the assessment and from the PDF, resave the PDF, and then physically print out on paper the EQ portion and hand it out at the workshop after presenting the information on EQ and having people understand what it is. It tends to significantly decrease defensiveness, and it allows people to be humble enough once they've learned what EQ is and the fact that they can improve it just by learning about it. It usually lowers the ego and puts them into learning mode as opposed to sending something out that they may find a little offensive or misinterpret before you get a chance to be in front of them. The other thing that you can do to reduce the impact that EQ sometimes have, and I don't want to qualify this, people aren't getting upset and freaking out at the reports, but even professionals, sometimes sharpening the saw can be humbling, and it can cut a little bit. And so if you're dealing with a group or with an individual that is very competitive and may not have a high level of self-awareness or self-regulation, then you can see it at the bottom of the screen. You can actually, in link administration, check a box and disable the populations and the means distribution. And those are when we see the horizontal lines for each of the dimensions, and it shows where the participant score is compared to the population, meaning 2/3 of the population spread. Sometimes if it's lower, they might get hung up on that. And if you disable that, and we have a scale of 1 to 10, and they score 4.5, they may see themselves as average as opposed to being lower than 2/3 of the population. I will qualify this statement as well by saying if you check that box, it not only disables the populations and means distributions for the EQ portion, but also for the DISC and the driving forces area as well. So I would just encourage you to experiment with it. If you have reports in your link administration, you can check the box, pull up the report again, and see the difference. But we have used this from time to time with we'll say sensitive coaching clients or sensitive teams with whom we were working. So the last thing I'd like to share with you as far as going to market is make sure as you're using this tool, have people focus on, and our recommendation is just improving on 2 of the emotional quotient dimensions for improvement. As you know, there are 5 dimensions of EQ, and usually the overachievers will want to work on all 5, and we'd like to say, let's get some wins under our belt. Let's choose 1 or 2 of the dimensions. Maybe it's empathy, and maybe it's self-regulation. And then for each of those dimensions, one of the beautiful things about the report is there are individual pages that maybe have 10 or 12 or 14 bullet points of things that people can do to improve in those dimensions. And our second comment there is choose 2, no more than 3, improvement strategies for each dimension. And that's simply working through the list of recommended improvement strategies for each of those dimensions and working with your clients to figure out which of those things make sense to them that they can incorporate into their work life and their daily habits so they can actually have improvement, as opposed to trying to improve on everything immediately. If you can get a few wins under your belt, you'll be much more successful, that we have found, you'll be much more successful in the integration and the long-term improvement of folks. Okay? We just put up a bullet at the bottom where we say we go nuts on. We really want to communicate the importance and the value of this integrated, what we call the blended portions of the report. You have it right after the DISC and driving forces that shares the integrated, how your DISC style and your driving forces work together. And as we saw with Bob, and I believe we have it on the next screen, here it is again, we have about 1.5 pages of verbiage, and this is just 1 paragraph from that 1.5 pages. The 1.5 pages of this that integrates is DISC style, his driving force style, and his emotional quotient. And to go back with Bob, this has been transformational for his growth. And this is someone that's, I believe he's 62 years old, and some people might write him off and say you can't teach a little dog new tricks. He has thanked us, and he's very grateful for the growth that he has had by learning about this. In fact, he wishes that he met us a long time ago because he feels that the company would be in an even better space than it is now. So the last few helpful hints, and this doesn't really sound overbearing or too high D, but basically we don't make it an option. When we talk about using assessments with our clients, this is our go-to assessment. It used to be the disc and driving forces. Now it's just the TriMetrix EQ. That's just what it is. We rarely have clients push back, and if rarely they do, it's usually not a significant conversation to have them see the benefit. And the second bullet is important too, and this will increase your revenue and your report count, is after you go through a coaching session or a leadership program with a large group, you can reassess with another EQ to see the improvement. And the wonderful thing about this is, and you don't have to be a rocket scientist with graphing and with Excel, but it's fairly easy to develop a spider graph that shows the 5 dimensions before you've worked with a client or group, and the 5 dimensions after. You can just plot them in Excel and push a button, you have a spider graph, and we always see improvement in typically 3 to 4, if not all 5 of the dimensions. And basically what you have there is proof that this works. And if you're working in a larger organization and you're going to try to populate your workshops or your programs into other departments, what a great sales tool for that, because you have visual proof of where the group was before you worked with them and where they are after you worked with them. And I know many of you probably know Judy Suter. She is PF001, and she always likes to say she had her best year ever, and we're happy to say that 2016 indeed was our best year ever. That's my partner Lindsay there with me in our strategy/celebration week down in Key West in October, and we already have it booked for November of this year. But it really is a powerful tool. It's a moneymaker. And now I'd like to give you a few minutes before we do the Q&A to think about, with your practice and with your business, how can you apply 1 or 2 of these, or ideally 3 ideas that you've picked up from today into your individual practice. Knowing that it might not be overnight, but what can you put in place that is, we're in the summer now, as you're looking to September and the workshop season in the fall, as we call fall hunting season, and Q4, what can you take from this that you might be able to apply into your business? So with that, I will thank you, and I will open it up to Q&A. And Candace, will you see the questions as they come in?
I absolutely can. So just a reminder for everyone there, we're going to pause the presentation here, and thank you again, Mark. It's really been so insightful to see how TriMetrix EQ has worked really well for your practice. So let's turn it over to our attendees. We do have a few questions coming through, but as a reminder to those that are on the webinar, please submit any questions that you have in the questions pane of the control panel. So we do have a few queued up so far here, Mark, and I'll read them to you and continue to read them as they come in. We have a question here from Jerry Houston, who asks, is EQ valid in hiring situations today?
You know, it's a judgment call, and someone submitted a similar question before the workshop, and I'm going to answer it the way that we feel it's used best. And we have 2 divisions, and Bluewater Advisory is our coaching and our training programs and those types of things, and we use the TriMetrix EQ all throughout. We also have a division called Bluewater Search, which is strictly a high-level retained search business, and we only do about 24 retained searches a year, and we typically use the TriMetrix HD, the new DNA, the 25 DNA, for selection, and we may use the EQ for onboarding, but we don't use it as an upfront tool in hiring. So when we're doing it as retained search, we do not use it on the upfront, but we use it once the person is in place and for the onboarding. In our other practice in Bluewater Advisory, we're often assisting with selection, what we call selection support, and it might be helping a client with someone that's already on staff to see if they're able to go to the next step, or they might have 3 or 4 candidates that they're considering, and they ask us to do a deeper dive, more of a psychological profile type of thing, and then we do use it. So I hope that answers the question. It is a validated tool, but it's arguable, whether it's validated for selection, and so we do our best to stay on the proper side of the hiring practices.
Perfect, thank you. Jerry did have a follow-up question here as well, and he's asking, do you see a correlation between EQ and SQ?
A little bit, but again, there's a white paper in the making, and I don't want to put Lindsay on the spot, but that may be a winter project for her. So for now, I'm going to defer that question and take your next one.
No problem. Another question here coming in from Norm Bombay asking, do introverts make better balanced, calm decisions overall than extroverts?
Hey, Norm. That's a judgment call too, and I would say an introvert that's not too high of an S may make better balanced decisions, but whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, your decision making is absolutely going to be better if you have a higher level of EQ than if you don't. And one of our favorite phrases, and a few people submitted earlier questions about how do you get an executive's attention about this, one of our favorite phrases when we're speaking to EQ is that unlike our IQ, our intellect quotient, that basically maxes when we're in our early 20s, EQ can be increased just by learning about it. And so that really gets people's attention. So going back to Norm's question, the higher level of EQ, I believe you're going to make better decisions whether you're an extrovert or introvert. And depending upon which side of the discharge you're on, you may argue for either side. I think most of the people on the call are probably on the D and the I side that might argue that extroverts make better decisions.
Excellent, thank you. We do have a few questions coming in regarding the spider graph, and very specifically wanting to know if there's an example or an Excel template or some quick tips and tricks that you would recommend in terms of building the spider graph for your clients.
Yeah, I would suggest that maybe people reach out to us outside or maybe through TPI, whatever the proper channel is. And just as we shared our driving forces presentation about a year and a half ago before TPIs, we'd have to unlogo ours. We have it pretty well logoed up, but we'll figure out the best way to share that, even if it's as minimal as an instruction set to create those. So we'll work with TPI to make sure that somehow we disseminate that information.
Great, perfect. And we can absolutely collaborate together to share that with the attendees on today's call. Another question that is coming in from Hala Baisha, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, Hala. What are some of the comments that clients have shared post-assessment? Well,
we really heard it all. Usually, the term humbled comes up quite a bit. Oftentimes we hear like, boy, I'm pretty bad at this stuff. And we go out of our way to share with people, it's not about being good or bad. It's all relative. And there are 5 dimensions, and there are many people that are really good at self-regulation, but they might not be very strong in self-awareness. And so what that means is that you see this steady eddy, but the person might be suffering from turmoil inside. And I'll give you a quick, I'll say the example if we have time, but an example about how we help someone in just that situation where they had a low level of self-awareness, but a higher level of self-regulation. So if we have time, I'll get back to that canvas.
Okay, great. Another question coming in, and I think it comes from Ted Gorski, which I think is an excellent question overall regarding competition. And he wants to essentially know, his specific question is, how would you sell the TriMetrix EQ to an organization who uses an assessment like PI? But I think overall, any other EQ tools in the marketplace, how do you position that accordingly, Mark?
As I said, as we were going through the slides, we have not found an assessment that's better than the TriMetrix EQ that incorporates the behavioral style, the motivators and the driving forces, and the emotional quotient. It's just not there. And I'll also qualify, we don't use any other assessments other than PTI assessments. But we look at everything. I get the PI emails as you do, and so we look at everything that's out there to stay current with the competition. But we've never had an instance where someone was using a standalone assessment like the PI or the CDI or something else, and they see the TriMetrix EQ and they don't agree that what we have is a stronger tool. I think the important part as far as selling it into an organization, if it's a larger organization, and this is going to go off on a little bit of a sales strategy plan, is to understand where the connection to the legacy tool is. And often it might be some strange relationship of someone that has influence over HR and either plays golf or is a fraternity brother to someone that has these tools, or maybe to one of these executive peer chairs. And if you can understand really what the motivation is, then it's easier to speak to it objectively and say, if we take the relationship out for a moment, and oftentimes the relationship may go back a long time, but if we take the relationship out and focus on what's best for the organization and for the employees of the organization, how can you argue that this is not a better tool? And that's when you put it like that, that's usually where we've been able to turn many of those legacy relationships, saying, you're right, we can't argue against the tool, so we're gonna use this one.
Another question coming in from Barbara Chan essentially wants to know any tips or tricks that you have for conducting, for example, three-hour workshops around the three parts of the TriMetrix EQ with a team. Any suggestions that you would give, Barbara? Mark?
Sure. We try to match our exercises and the interpersonal portions of the workshop with the culture of the organization. And that may sound basic, but we've seen people really struggle when they go into a very conservative group, for example, legal administrators, and try to have too much fun with them. And then we've also seen people fail on the other side of the continuum, where they go in too serious with a group of, say, architects, that want to have fun. And so we really try to get to know the organization before we go in, and even if we don't have the opportunity to spend a lot of time with them, we try to get some intel, whether it's from somebody else in the organization or whoever our sponsor is bringing us into the organization, so we can plan our workshop activities appropriately. I'll also say that we always get evaluations after all of our workshops, and something that's been consistent since we've been doing these is that adults learn by doing, and they love the small group interactions. We purposely will organize people with varying disc styles, so we have people looking at things from different views and approaching things, and we'll also try to vary them by their driving forces as well. And when it comes to the EQ, we're careful not to put people into uncomfortable positions. And so, we might have people sit down and share their disc graphs. We don't ask people to sit down and share their EQ charts. But we have some tools that are used, for example, with ice breaking. And there's a tool that a client in Sedona, Arizona, gave me a few months ago, and it's called Choose Wisely. And it's used for an icebreaker in really any group, and it works really well with the EQ because it's asking you experiential questions. When was the last time that you did something nice for someone, and what was it? Those types of things. And so they're safe questions, and they're not too touchy-feely, but it's just enough to get people opening up, and it really opens up that empathy window. One of the questions that we had prior to the workshop is empathy something that can really be trained? And probably of the five, empathy is number 4 or 5 as far as the ability to increase empathy. I think the other one, in my opinion, would be motivation. If it's not there, it's hard to put in what God left out, as they say. But by using an icebreaker that uses experiential and personal but appropriate questions, it naturally raises the empathy in the room, and it gets people into learning mode, and I want to learn more about this. We just did it yesterday, as a matter of fact. So I'm going to answer one more question that was submitted previously, and the question was, is TriMetrix EQ better for coaching than TriMetrix HD? And you may be able to guess my answer. The answer is use both. Use the TriMetrix HD and run an EQ separately using the same link, or conversely, use the TriMetrix EQ and run the academic capacity section and competency section separately. So with that, I'm going to wrap up, and I'll turn it over to Candace to wrap up if she can hear me. And I want to thank you for attending, and look forward to, and I wish everyone well using this tool.
I think that we had a good amount of questions come through. Thank you to those of you who stood by. And a special thank you to you, Mark. You know, you sharing your do's and don'ts when it comes to EQ is incredibly helpful. And I'm sure everyone here would love to increase their business by $87,000 a year just by using EQ. What really cemented your learnings for me is seeing those recommendations and how you can actually apply to the business. So thank you so much, Mark, for sharing your knowledge and your perspective.
It's my great pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I sent a notice via the chat and GoToWebinar to everybody. But as a follow-up to this presentation, we will be sending you the replay link as well as a survey where you can provide feedback on today's webinar. Thank you, Mark, and thank you, everybody, for joining today.